The Defense Secretary assures Camp Pendleton Marines they will not be going back into Iraq. Is San Diego's high cost of living sending businesses elsewhere? And a developer's plans to build hundreds of homes on a defunct Escondido golf course has neighbors in battle mode. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, August 15th. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Voice of San Diego reporter Lisa Halverstadt, Tony Perry, San Diego Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times, and KPBS North County editor Allison St. John. Well, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel could not have been clearer in his visit to Camp Pendleton this week. He and President Obama have no plans to send Marines back into Iraq. Limited bombing missions, airdrops, and some daring rescues have been undertaken by Americans over the past week, but Hagel shot down the idea that boots will be back on the ground in Iraq. And Tony, the situation there is fluid. A lot of changes this week, and starting with the Prime Minister in Iraq, but it doesn't look like Marines are going back yet.
Not in combat mode, no. In an assessment mode to try and find out what the heck is going on, what can we do about it, what help can we provide the Iraqi army, which dissolved first time they had to fight in this current situation. What can we do to help the Kurds? The Kurds, those folks way up there near Turkey, believed by me to be the toughest people on the face of the earth. What can we do to help them? Lots of variables here. The Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, he was coming back from a around-the-world trip, as it were, and he stopped at Camp Pendleton and, among other things, said no combat Marines. Now, he did send that very day 130 personnel, including some Marines, to Erbil. And
what are they doing specifically?
Well, that's the Kurdish capital. They're supporting the Kurds, and they were also looking at that situation where the Yazidis, this sort of religious, small religious sect, and they're surrounded on a mountaintop by the Islamic radicals. And they needed to be rescued. And
yeah, they were talking about a slaughter up there.
They were talking about slaughter. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. The problem is we don't know how many, what's their situation, and that's what these 130 were meant to do. For about 24 hours, there was kind of a boomlet that said, we're going to go in and rescue them with an evacuation, the sort of thing the Marines practice for all the time up there and are very good at. After about 24 hours, and they had done an assessment, they said there's not enough up there that warrant immediate help. We'll keep resupplying them with water and food. We'll keep the radicals who have encircled them on that mountain at bay. But the Kurds, again, the toughest people on the face of the earth, I believe, and so did Marco Polo, they're rescuing them because it's in their interest to rescue those folks, because the Kurds have their own interests and what they want is their own country. We promised it to them after World War I and we reneged. I think when the smoke clears, we're going to find that Kurdistan is now an independent country, independent of Baghdad, maybe nip off a little bit of Turkey along with it. What we don't have yet, what we do not have from the administration, admittedly, including the Secretary of Defense's people, we don't yet have a clear view of what's going on over there, and also, most importantly, what level of threat does it pose to the United States of America? In other words, what do we have to do not just to help out the Iraqis and the Kurds and the Yazidis, but what do we have to do to protect the 300 million people called Americans? We really don't have much of an assessment on that yet. We have a lot of rhetoric, but the rhetoric seems to be running away with the thought process, and we do not have from the administration, admittedly, and they will admit it. Now, some political figures, they know, they've got their views. Yeah, well, being a senator is one thing, but being the president makes you the commander-in-chief, and we have yet to see his hold card on that.
Right. Allison?
I think the thing that really struck many of us watching was those people up on the mountain and this feeling like the United States has to go in and save them. But then it was such a contrast when we heard that actually there weren't that many of them up there. I mean, was this the result of the 130? Many of them were Marines, according to Hagel, who actually went up there and saw that what we'd heard from reporters was no longer the case.
Yeah, they went up there in some helos with protection from fast movers. Took a look at the numbers, took a look at their condition, and found that it was far fewer. They're not in good shape, but they're not in as dire a shape as we thought. Also, a whole bunch, 5, 10, 15,000, you pick it, have escaped through a corridor back to areas where their homeland is up there. Our help, we pinned down the ISIS folks with our air power, and the Kurds help them out. But you're right. We've been told 40,000 and mass slaughters. Well, that's anecdotal, and anecdotal is a tough thing to make a decision, a military decision on, and that's what we're looking for, real facts on the ground. That's what that 130 in Erbil, which is still being protected by our air power, not to mention a couple hundred folks, personnel in Baghdad doing the same thing. Right. And apparently their reports, and I talked to the Secretary's people, have not yet been forwarded. I imagine they're sending dailies in, but the overall report, which will initially be confidential and then presumably will be leaked out, is not yet in. So we really don't know what the assessment is. What can we do for these folks, the Iraqis, the Kurds, and what can we do to protect ourselves?
Now, one thing Secretary Hagel at his visit to Camp Pendleton was definite about here was he put the blame on this situation squarely on the shoulders of Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, and we have a clip here. Let's hear what the Secretary had to say on that.
This is a government that has to be inclusive. It needs to be a unity government that shares power, which was the intended purpose of the Constitution they wrote. That hasn't happened the last 5 years, and because of that, Iraq is in the kind of position it's in today because that inclusive participatory government that should have been in place and should have brought together all the different factions of Iraq didn't occur.
So this dream that he and the president have of an inclusive government, is it still a dream?
That's kind of long term also, and we just don't know. The preferred narrative of the administration, with some backing, is that at the point the Americans left in the late 2011, we had spent, of course, a lot of time and billions of dollars training up the Iraqi army after initially dissolving it. And they had an officer corps of quality. They were learning the importance of non-commissioned officers, sergeants, and they were learning such dull things as logistics and supply. But that in the time after we left, it is said that Maliki, the prime minister, started devastating the officer corps and giving away officer ranks as political plums with nice salaries and such. The non-commissioned officer ranks just kind of dissipated because that's not really in the firmament of their culture, the idea that sergeants should run the army as they do the United States Army.
So when we see this ISIS extremists coming and roaring across the countryside, they're laying down their weapons.
They threw down their weapons, and they didn't like their officers. Yeah. They didn't trust them. The officers, in many cases, apparently were thieves, and they just didn't see
any point in dying for these guys.
Exactly. As opposed to the Kurds. Mm-hmm. The Kurds are tough, and they're disciplined, and they know what they want. They want their own country. We're sneaking them some arms. The French are coming in. Now, we haven't been able to give them a lot of weapons because the Turks didn't want it. Turkey is a NATO ally and a big friend of ours. They don't like the idea. They have a lot of Kurds in their own country. They don't like the idea of Kurdish nationalism flaring up. And we couldn't give them, the Kurds, direct weapons because we were trying at least to have a relationship with Baghdad, and Baghdad didn't want that. I think ultimately we said, you can take your relationship and go away with it. Mm-hmm. We're gonna give these people armaments. They know how to fight, and they do.
Well, we're going to leave it there, and I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more reporting as we go forward here on this issue nationally and with the local Marines. All right, we all know it costs a lot to work and live in America's finest city. It's true for us workers. It's true for companies dealing with relatively high taxes, regulations, and an increasing minimum wage. And some say it's enough to send some companies elsewhere. So, Lisa, are businesses leaving San Diego, and what are some of the main reasons if they are? Well,
some are. And some of the same reasons that they cite for leaving are the reasons that Californians complain about living here. So higher energy costs, there are more regulations to deal with. Sometimes there's concern that maybe water utilities aren't going to be as plentiful as some would want.
Mm-hmm. And there was a survey out showing that it's more complex than simply just the high cost of living, right?
Yes, there are certainly other issues as well. And I mean, you could put it kind of depends in some ways on the company itself as to their specific story or specific issues that they have.
And we've seen the competition with Texas and the Governor Perry there trying to lure people away. And with some success. Allison?
Well, I mean, we've heard of companies coming to San Diego just because the CEOs want to live in San Diego. It's such a wonderful place to live. Do you think that perhaps all the other elements of the cost of actually housing for their employees and all the state regulations, which are quite high, is now beginning to outweigh the advantage that we have with the weather?
Well, I would actually like to take a step back and talk about how big of a deal this relocation thing really is. I mean, it gets so much coverage. It seems like every other week there's a story about a company leaving. But actually, I was talking to a really well-respected state economist who really likened these relocations to literally a pimple on the state of California economy. That's how he referred to it, and was actually pretty mad that I even wanted to talk about the issue. So I had gotten access to a database that tracked company moves across the country from 1989 to 2011, so 22-year period. And I'm going to pull out some notes here so I give you guys the right numbers. But to give you perspective first, the latest census of business for San Diego County found that we have about 98,000 businesses here. And this database showed that from 1989 to 2011, 3,958 companies moved out of state. Now think about that in the perspective of how many companies.
Right.
Yes, there are. And then what we also have to factor in, as Allison kind of pointed out, is there are some companies that are moving here.
Right.
So when you factor that in, then there was just a net 375 companies over that whole 22-year period that we lost to other states.
So this is received wisdom that it's too expensive here. All these other problems, companies are leaving. You know, we've got to entice them to stay, and it may not be so. Tony?
Well, isn't this part of our political culture? That is to say, we have a group, the mayor, for example, Chamber of Commerce, some other loudspeakers, editorial pages, that kind of thing. And they're basically economic fundamentalists. They believe that government is bad in relationship to private industry, and almost everything government does is bad unless you're cutting taxes or subsidizing. And we just live with this. This is just, we have this bedrock of believers here who are in positions of either authority or they have megaphones like the editorial pages. I wonder, do other cities, large cities, rub their hands and worry incessantly about losing businesses because, my goodness, government is doing this or that? Or?
Oh, I think that this is happening everywhere, but I think that it's really a California story. And what's funny, too, is in that database, when I analyzed the data, I found that more companies from San Diego are moving to other parts of California or even within the same county than are moving anywhere else. So over this 22-year period, more than 3 times the number of companies moved to Riverside that moved to the whole state of Texas. So clearly there's a lot of movement. So, you know, maybe people will talk about, oh, San Francisco is not friendly to business. Well, there are California companies that are moving to San Francisco, and then there are San Francisco companies that are moving to San Diego or even Fresno.
Well, if San Diego is not friendly to business, it isn't for want of trying. I mean, that's been a political mantra as long as I can remember. We've got to streamline government and make it business friendly. We just have to. We've had all these Republican mayors and Republican council members and this Chamber of Commerce.
Business friendly folks, yeah.
Indeed. I mean, if it isn't now, it isn't for want of trying.
We have a one take evening edition, KPBS evening edition this week. We interviewed Alan Ginn, University of San Diego economist, and let's hear his take on this whole thing.
The big problem that we have here is the high cost of living, particularly housing. Housing is much less expensive in Texas, and so they're able to offer their employees actually less money to work there. And that's one of the strategies of this Vista Equity Partners, is that they bring companies from California. They reduce costs by hiring low-cost young talent, and then increase their profits.
All right, now by that reasoning here, and I'm not saying he isn't onto something there, of course, Detroit, which is in bankruptcy, you can almost buy a house there on your credit card. I mean, well, at some point, aren't people going to flock to Detroit and businesses there? And there has been some revitalization, but it's not that simple, is it?
Yeah, well, I'd rather be here in February than in Detroit.
Than in Detroit, yeah, maybe any time of the year, and I'm from Detroit. But, you know, it is a very complex problem, and Allison?
So does this mean that, you know, when we hear these arguments that we should not be imposing state regulations on things like reducing greenhouse gases and anything that would restrict business, the argument is, oh, they're leaving. does that mean that that argument really is not as strong as we've been led to believe?
Well, I'd like to take a step back based on your question and kind of explain. So as part of this project, I'm actually working on a project that aims to kind of define what it means to be business unfriendly, as a lot of people might describe San Diego or California. And what I'm trying to do is find out what specific regulations businesses actually have issues with. So maybe it's related to the California Environmental Quality Act, or acts about emissions and other things. But to look at those things and then say, okay, well, what is the trade-off that we get associated with this that might be a positive, and then also to look at the regulation and say, okay, so this was something that was put into effect 40 years ago. Does everything still make sense? So I haven't really come to any conclusions yet about whether things are good or bad, but that's really one of the reasons that I'm spending several weeks working on a project about all this.
Aren't we slaves to the national economy? That is to say, we can tinker around with this regulation or that regulation, but businesses come and go based on how the national economy, and when it tanked several years ago, there was an impact regardless of what the minimum wage was. It does seem to me this is another one of these. San Diego is not just the center of the earth, but the entire earth. And if we can just jigger around our regulations, everything is fine. Well, we're connected to a national economy that, as I say, tanked and has yet to quite recover. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that isn't awfully more important to whether businesses come and go to Tennessee than whether there's a stop sign at 3rd and Elm.
Well, there's certain elements, though, of course, and Dr. Jim talked about it in that bite, was the cost of housing here. I mean, we were way off the chart. When the bubble hit nationally, as you're talking about, the bubble really hit here. And in that sense, in the housing crisis, we were in the center of the universe. So it depends on which element you're talking about.
Well, yes, and Beacon Economics, an economic forecasting group, just put out a report the other week essentially saying that housing costs are one of the biggest issues that the California economy faces.
All right. Well, speaking of housing, we're going to get into a whole other housing issue here in our next segment. Now, golfers might survey a manicured golf course and see a wonderful place to knock around a little dimpled ball. A developer might envision hundreds of homes and millions in profits in that same place. And that's the case in Escondido, where a dying golf course has become a battleground, pitting neighbors against a developer. And Allison, this fight's had a unique smell to it, has it not, here in recent months?
Right to it.
Yes, a foul odor, as some people say.
Yes.
That's what's really drawn people's attention to it, and I think the developer probably is regretting bitterly that he ever did this by spreading a certain amount of chicken excrement on the golf course, claiming that this was for the maintenance of the golf course when he had already previously ceased watering it. So I don't know how that would help turn a brown golf course any greener.
And the neighbors thought that really stunk, literally and figuratively.
They did, and in fact even the county air pollution control district said this is a big violation, and they're currently considering whether to fine the developer tens of thousands of dollars. I think it's all part of the developer's attempt, to find a way to get what he bought the course for in the first place. I mean, the name of the company is Stuck in the Rough, LLC, so you could get a clue from that.
By the Mulligan Brothers? I mean,
the Mulligan Brothers.
Stuck in the poo, it sounds like.
So his intentions here are fairly clear. He did actually buy 2 golf courses. The other one is in Poway, and that one he is not attempting to turn into a development. But this one...
Yeah, you've been up there, and you've seen what it looks like. Describe for us.
I feel very sorry for the people who live around it. They bought their homes, to live next to a beautiful green space.
But nothing in their...
Homeowners Association.
Yeah.
Well, here's the
all
rub.
the lawyers.
The lawyers do not agree on this. The developer believes that under the zoning codes in the city, he can build 600 homes on this, and so to be asking in this initiative that's on the November ballot to build 430 is, in his view, a compromise.
But they were never assured, even though they would buy a home on the 9th hole, that it was going to stay a golf course forever. I mean, they were always sort of living...
No, this is basically their argument, is that their lots were made a little smaller on the understanding that the open space was to make up for it. Right, and so even the city attorney of Escondido seems convinced that he can argue that this open space should remain open space, and that the city council, who are supporting another initiative that the citizens passed, saying we want to keep this as open space, that he will be able to provide the legal backing for that.
And quickly tell us, it's going to be on the ballot. There's going to be a vote in November on this.
There's going to be a vote on November, and if the Escondido citizens vote for it, then that's not the end of the battle. I'm sure the developer will continue to fight, because this is part of a national trend, really, of an overdevelopment of golf courses throughout the nation and a reduction in the number of people now playing golf. And a certain number of golf courses are going to have to disappear. In fact, thousands of them around the nation are going to have to disappear in order to rebalance the industry, according to golf association experts.
Yeah, so the question becomes, you've got all of these, thousands of acres in many cases, and these big rolling open spaces. What happens to them? Now we have another golf course in North County that's in trouble too, and what's the situation with
San
that
Luis Rey Golf Course in Bonsall? Yeah, that's a very well-known golf course. Interestingly, that is being turned into a mitigation bank, which means that you can stop watering the greens, you leave it open space, you plant native species, and then you use it so that a developer can purchase the mitigation rights. In other words, if the developer spends money on keeping that golf course as open space, he then gets the rights to build somewhere else. So it's a sort of different twist on the same use of golf courses.
What if he finds a number of Titleists that I lost in the rough?
You could sell them for about $1 a piece if you didn't put a smile on
Didn't
them.
people join a country club or a golf association thinking, again, I'm going to get to play golf forever and ever, and are they litigating this?
No, the golfers are not so worried, because, to be honest, there are a lot of other alternatives in North County. I mean, you only have to drive a few miles and you'll find another good golf course. The golf courses were overbuilt in North County, as in the whole nation, in the 1990s.
We've got 90-some in this county, I believe. I don't know the exact number right now. Maybe
It's about 90, yeah, but 3 of them have closed. One in Ramona, Chula Vista, and Rancho San Diego have recently closed, and more probably will have to close before the industry sort of balances out. There are more golf courses than golfers need.
Well, let's briefly talk about that. Now, you and I are golfers from way back. Maybe you've played, Lisa and Allison, I don't know, but
Not very well.
I can hit a ball.
What's the reason now? Why is it dropping down? I know the recession had something to do with it. It's an expensive sport.
Yeah, well, I think actually it is expensive, but money may not be the only thing. People are speculating that the world is moving faster, and retirees are more interested in staying in touch with their mobile devices than on spending hours and hours on the golf course. And this is a sport you have to practice. You can't just drop in, once a month.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people bought a lot of nice equipment, Callaway up in Carlsbad, etc., and then they had a little fun, and then they said, wow, this is really difficult. Can I find an easier sport?
That's what happened to me, actually.
And
But also millennials just are not taking to the sport as much.
Exactly.
And even, I know the Dick's Sporting Goods CEO made some big news several months back when he said, wow, our sales are so down for all sorts of golf equipment.
So what are the millennials doing? Bike riding, yoga?
Yes, bicycling, snowboarding, all these other things that may actually be kind of hard to learn, but maybe they're a little bit more thrilling, fast-paced.
And Allison, you touched on it, the old notion of having the power golf round and the business executives spending 4 hours out there and talking. It moves. The world's moving so fast. The business world takes too long. You can communicate so quickly. You can communicate around the world via Skype and have a meeting with somebody in Tokyo. You don't need to have them out on the Escondido golf links.
Yeah, the Golf Association argues that actually the business has reached the bottom and that it's going to start gradually picking up as baby boomers retire. But we will see if that is the case. And of course, we haven't mentioned the big issue, which is water. I mean, the cost of water to keep those things green is this really the best way to use our scarce water resources?
And of these 90 courses in San Diego County, and I'm familiar, I get around to a few of them, I'm familiar with only a handful that have the purple pipes that do recycling and all. Most of them, it's just coming out of the fresh water from the aqueduct in the Colorado River and the Sierra, and where we get our sources of water. And you wonder about that, too, if it isn't a survival thing. Why aren't they pushing to recycle?
I think this is going to be an issue, because there are golf courses that are doing very well and are going to survive. It's like, if you live next to a golf course, the thing to do is figure out, is your golf course one of the ones on the hit list, or is it really doing well and going to survive? And if it's going to survive, how is it going to be watered? And I think it's really important that we do start thinking
Torrey
about it.
Pines, the only public course to have a PGA tournament. Am I right there? I think I am.
Well, it's one of the few, certainly, but yeah. Absolutely.
And a beautiful one at that.
Yeah.
So we're not golf poor yet.
Yeah. No, and Torrey, you made a good note. That was one of the best ones in recent years. Of course, that great finale between between Tiger and Rocco in the playoff, and it got the whole country excited. And it benefited Balboa, another city-owned course, because the money generated there really helped to improve that. So there's a few courses, obviously, that are doing very well.
Well, and there's another example in North County, Oceanside, which is a municipal golf course, which is therefore more accessible for your average, Joe who just wants to go and play around. That one is not being shut down, and an entrepreneur has come forward and said, I want to run this golf course as a golf course. You don't have to develop it, and we'll see whether he succeeds.
That's a very busy course. It's a municipal course. It's not
beautiful ocean view,
but it's beautiful. I am a little afraid on the back nine, those signs on the hill that say, watch out for snakes.
Yeah.
there are snakes that come down.
And there are, I can say that from personal experience.
But that's a nice one. I mean, that's if you pardon the phrase, it's kind of a working man's kind of place. I mean, it's not Fortune 500 execs out there hitting the ball and making deals. They can do that at
But there are some public golf courses. Carlsbad has just spent a lot of money on a new golf course, and I think is losing money on it. So, there are some municipalities that have really lost out big time, as well as private golf courses.
And you can't shift gears on a dime. You can't just close up the shop and run it to somebody else. It's a golf course. It takes time to turn it around. Well, very interesting, and I know we'll be covering that as we move to November and that vote up in Escondido. And that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Lisa Halverstadt, a voice of San Diego, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Allison St. John of KPBS News. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.